Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. Today, I'm joined by Eric Wagner, an automotive industry leader focused on talent, leadership, and building stronger career pathways. We're talking about what it takes to attract, develop, and retain technicians. And I'm really, really excited for this conversation. Eric, you and I had, I think, a conversation prior to hitting record that we could have actually recorded, and it would have been a great podcast on its own. So I'm just excited to have you on. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Jay, and likewise, I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me. This is a terrific chance to talk about the industry and talk about where we're at, and I'm excited, and I hope the listeners are excited too.
All right. Well, let's start off with your background. You've spent a lot of time in the automotive world in a variety of different roles. You've seen kind of, I think, the good, bad, and ugly about dealerships and just in general. I'm really interested to get your perspective on a bunch of different things as we go through this conversation. But let's start with where it started at. How did you get into cars?
So, when I tell people all of this, they get a real chuckle because my career path is certainly not one you would expect to hear for an automotive professional. I actually went to college after high school, got myself a marketing degree, and I did what every other marketing major did in the late aughts or whatever. 2007 is when I graduated. Marketing jobs weren't paying very well. There weren't a whole lot of them out there, and they were not paying that great. So I did what everybody else did, and I went and got a sales job. And I was working for a distributor for BG products. Shout out to BG, love their products, good stuff. I worked for that distributor for about 4 years, cut my teeth in the industry, and learned a lot. Learned a lot about how the business works, how the service fixed ops business works, parts, all that good stuff. Um, when the economy tended to take a bit of a downturn, in the area that I was in, so I ended up transitioning to the dealership level at that point. Spent some time as a service advisor for a GM dealer, moved over to the import world with Nissan, kind of worked my way up from being a service writer to a dispatcher to a service manager, ended up a fixed ops director for a little while. And then I had an opportunity to go independent and build a service center from scratch, which was a very exciting opportunity. Looking back on it, it was a lot of fun. Not every day was fun, but looking back on it, the whole of it was very, very interesting. And then my most recent role, I just spent the past few years working with Ford Motor Company on technician recruiting and retention initiatives. And that brings me here today.
Oh, it's an interesting story in that you've been able to see a lot of different operations because of the jobs that you've had, right? And I think there's
Yeah,
I learned that throughout my career working as a dealer rep from a manufacturer standpoint, where when you get to go in and see all of the different types of dealerships, and even though they've got the same brand on the sign, there's a lot of differences once you get inside those dealerships. And I think the general public might see it as, well, that's the one brand and they all kind of run the same, and it's almost like a McDonald's where every single one is kind of similar, right? Or at least they used to be. uh, do you get the sense that that gave you some ability to learn some things that maybe you wouldn't have had you just stayed in one dealership group the entire time of your career?
absolutely. Absolutely. One thing that was amazing to me, and I'll never forget it, as it was on my ride along. I think it was my first day working for the BG distributor. The sales rep that I was traveling with, he was kind of talking me through everything, and he explained something to me, and I guess it was one of those explain it like I'm five moments, but it stuck with me for the past 20 plus years.
Worked.
He said that not only is every dealership its own separate business, but every department in every dealership is its own separate business. And looking at it from that perspective was really interesting to me, but it's 100% correct. In a dealership, the used car department is service's biggest customer in a lot of dealerships. And for parts, the service department is their biggest customer, and it's how those dynamics work that's really really interesting to me. But you're right, dealers, not all dealers are created equal. Some of them, the larger operations, operate a certain way. Smaller operations can work their way a little bit too, and when you take an operation from a smaller and you try to build it into a bigger one, the growing pains can be interesting to say the least. But there will be a lot of change and things like that. That's one thing that I've always loved about the automotive industry is every day is different
Oh,
and every opportunity is different. And there's a lot of stuff that stays the same, but there's a lot of stuff in there that is different enough that it keeps it exciting.
it was always fascinating to me, more from the manufacturer side, going into these different dealerships and seeing how much of an impact the dealer principal had on the whole operation, right? Or whoever the dealer general manager was, and whether that was in a really, really good sense or a really, really bad sense, there were both ends of that spectrum. And I think you could sense that when you walked in the door. It was really, really crazy once you start to see a lot of different organizations. And when you walk in, you get a sense. We always talk about culture and really trying to make sure that your shop has a great culture, but it's really evident when you're walking in the doors of different dealerships which ones had great leadership and really seemed like the people were having fun. And a lot of times those ones were the highest producing, whereas some of the others that, and again, this is just my experience, but some of the others where it was very tight and very, like nobody wanted to step out of line, it felt like they struggled a little bit more. And then there's some that were just completely unorganized and had no idea what they were doing. And so I think being able to see kind of the different structures and the different just differences, that does kind of make it fun too, right? Because you're seeing, maybe, we talked about the good, the bad, the ugly. When you're able to see a lot of organizations, you do see the good, the bad, the ugly, and you're able to pretty quickly identify which is in what bucket.
Absolutely. And you can see the good, the bad, and the ugly in one day if you just stick around long enough a lot of times. Um, you hit the nail on the head, Jay. I do believe that the leadership, specifically ownership and the GM, that I guess their heat travels down. Because if you've got, I remember there was an owner I worked for, um, great guy. And he would come down and kind of socialize with us and just kind of get to know us on the human side a little bit. He found out I liked barbecue, and so he would come down and he would talk about barbecue with me for like 15 minutes at a time every now and then. And it's funny because he liked to do things. One thing, when we had a Christmas party one year and it was a luncheon and he closed the service drive down. Now, this was a normal business day, but he closed the service drive down, had a live band in the service drive and everything. And there were a couple of folks in the service lane. They're like, God, this makes it really hard to work. And I'm sitting here like, this dude's name is on the building. If he wants to have a band in the service drive, let the man have a band in the service drive. But that was the relationship that we had. And then, you go to other dealerships where that relationship isn't quite there because the only time you're hearing from that senior leadership is when there's a problem. Then you're constantly on edge, you're constantly on eggshells, and it's hard to do anything but stare at the numbers and hope they're good.
Yeah.
And that's, in my opinion, that's no way to live. It's very tough to be successful in that kind of environment. Some people thrive on it, but good for them. There's a lot of people that don't.
I think in a lot of ways, those are the folks that have the hardest time with retention as well, right? If it's only numbers
Oh yeah.
conversations, there's not the people element to it, then I think you lose some of that ability to retain your best. And because it's just the only time I hear from my superiors is when it's about numbers. And I think when that happens, you become numb as an employee. And I think you look at it from the standpoint of, yeah, if I don't hit my numbers this one month, how loyal are they going to be to me? And I
Right.
just was talking with a friend of mine who had gotten let go by his group, and he has a lot of the people that were under him that I think are probably going to follow suit and leave. And in that conversation, I was talking to him about, I'm like, I think there are a lot of businesses in general that want that loyalty, but maybe don't show that loyalty back. And if there's not that sense of like they've got my back regardless, pretty easy to walk out the door.
Absolutely, Jay. And that's one thing that I really believe that over the next, I mean, we're already seeing it now with technicians, looking at the voice of the technician survey that you guys just recently came out with and everything. We're already seeing a large piece of this, but I do believe that the automotive industry as a whole, we are really close to shifting from being a numbers business to being a people business. And what I mean by that is, obviously, look, we're all here to make money, okay? And money's good. Cars are not going away, no matter what you hear. Nobody's going to go to riding a bicycle to work every day, unless they just have that opportunity to do so. And good for you if you do. I live in an area where I get snow, so I'm not comfortable doing
Same.
that. Um, yeah, but we're looking at situations where with technicians, we've seen their wages go up astronomically. It's funny because I think about it. I took over a Nissan dealership in 2019 as a fixed ops director, and my highest paid master technician through Nissan at that time was $31 an hour, and I was way overpaying that person. The average in my area was about 26.50 to $27, um, which is amazing because now you can't. I mean, you can't even get in the room with a master tech for $27 an hour. They'll laugh you out of the building. And so we've already seen the wages. Technicians have made it clear that some of the most important things to them is their training, a well-defined career path, and consistency in knowing how they're doing. Um, I can tell you in my experience, I rarely, if ever, got a performance review as an advisor or as a manager. Every now and then I'd hear something, but it wasn't real common. It was really just, hey, you made a little more money because you sold a little bit more, and and the money's good, but we're coming to a point where I believe the money is not going to silence all the concerns. Um, you look at it from a technician perspective, from an advisor perspective. A good service advisor, if you've got one that's talented, knows how to work the warranty process, knows how to get extra time out of service contracts, they can make a good technician great on efficiency and they can make them extra money. Conversely, a service advisor that's not very good, that doesn't know the tricks, that isn't motivated, that doesn't sell, they can break a technician really fast as well. And when a tech's not making their time, I have yet to meet a technician that doesn't want to break 40 hours a week. Even the guys that you would call lazy, they still get really discouraged when they're not making their time.
Yeah.
Technicians want to do well, and I believe that advisors do too. But I believe that we as an industry, we need to look at this from a people perspective. What are we doing to train our people? Do we even know what our people want?
Oof.
You know, it, do do you have a tech that I'm not going to name any names or anything like that, but I worked at a dealer at one point in time. We had a guy that worked for us. I still talk to this guy all the time. He still reaches out to me. We've known each other for quite a while now. Um, I tried to get him factory certified, and it didn't work. He's a terrible test taker, and he admitted it. He's like, "Dude, I'm bad at this. Like, I'm just not. I wasn't good in school. I'm good with my hands, but I wasn't good in school." I said, "Okay, fine." So we abandoned that, and the people above me were, they looked at him as like, "Well, he's not going anywhere. He'll just be on the lube rack forever," and didn't really pay any attention or anything like that. And of course, after I left that role, within a year, I heard from him, and he came to work for me in a different facet, and I just asked him because I had a little bit more freedom at the next role. I said, what do you want to learn? What do you want to do?" He said, "Man, I think I could do a good job with alignments." I said, "Okay, great." So I spent $400. I sent him to 2-day alignment school at Hunter Engineering. And he came back and he went from being a lube tech with no real hope for growth, and now he's a specialist at the dealer he's at, flat rate in 65 hours a week, one of their top suspension techs, and he's making a boatload more money than he was. And all it took was a 2-day alignment class and $400. Like, I'll take that return on investment 100 times out of 10.
I think,
But if you don't ask the question, you don't know.
well, to take a step back from there, this is where leadership comes into play. And I think you showed great leadership in asking what drove him, right? I think our industry, and this isn't just us, right? Like, I think this is a lot of different companies in the country, maybe the world, that make assumptions on what people want and make assumptions that, hey, this person's going to be good here, or they make a lot of assumptions without actually asking. And I think it takes having the relationship with the person like you did, where they can trust that, it's weird that somebody wouldn't, maybe in that manager employee relationship, not feel comfortable telling their manager that, hey, these are my goals and aspirations. But we see it every day where a technician doesn't feel comfortable, or that advisor, or even a service manager. I don't feel comfortable telling my boss that I have these goals, these personal goals. And I don't know what it is there. I think some of it is just lack of trust between the manager and the employee. And when you have that lack of trust, when you go to ask that question, maybe they aren't as forthcoming as they would be had they had a good relationship with you. And I think that's where a lot of our industry falls apart.
I agree. I agree. And I think the question that a manager can ask themselves, and honestly, an employee can ask this as well, an individual contributor, is, what do you know about your people? What do you know about your leadership? What does your leadership know about you? And it is hard to talk about what you want, because you don't want, there's that fine line between being ambitious and being annoying. And I think a lot of people are afraid to cross that line. They're afraid to be the squeaky wheel, because the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and a lot of times that grease finds you rolling down a hill out of the shop, you know? And, I worked with a manager for a while that, one of his favorite quotes, and I hated it, but, I heard him tell 3 or 4 technicians, "Hey, your toolbox has wheels." And that's terrible, and maybe that worked 15, 20 years ago. Maybe it did. But I think at this point, when we talk about what's going to set the automotive industry apart in the coming years, and what's going to keep the strong dealerships afloat and separate the old saying was separate the men from the boys, or whatever. I don't know what it is now, but you get my point. Is what do we know about who's working for us? Um, even back in the early 2000s, when I was learning how to be a service manager and how service worked, I had a service manager tell me, um, he said, with lube techs, with express technicians, you've got a year. And in that year, you've got to figure out, are they going to move up? Are they going to move out? Are they going to move around? What are they going to do? But at the end of the year, if you don't have an answer for that question, then you've probably got the answer to the question. And that stuck with me, because there's not a lot of people out there. There are some, but there's not a lot of people that just want to get in the lube rack and just be on the lube rack. They either want to move up and continue to further their career, or they're in the business and they want to, maybe they want to write service. Maybe they want to go work in parts. Uh, the beautiful thing about the automotive industry is there's a lot of seats to fill.
There are.
And it's, yeah, and it's a matter of knowing, if you've got somebody in-house that wants to fill one of those seats, that's going to be a whole lot better to develop that person than to just develop the one that's, well, they've been here long enough, let's give them a try. Are you sure that's who you want in that leadership role? Are you sure that's who you want selling? I know a lot of great technicians that make really rough service advisors. They're fantastic techs, but they don't have that, quote unquote bedside manner that you would need as an advisor to sell work. I know a lot of great techs and a lot of great advisors that don't make great managers. I know a lot of great managers that don't make good service advisors too, but they'll usually admit it.
They do. It's funny that you say that because I've seen the opposite happen too, where you have a terrible tech that ends up being a great service advisor. Or, I
Yep.
look at my own experience too, right? Just knowing that the technical side was never going to be my strength. And I started off as a technician. And I think if I were being honest with myself back then, I would have kind of seen that and said, okay, maybe I should look to other avenues. I do still value early time in a shop, my early days in a shop, because it taught me so much about the industry and so much about being in a shop. And then as I transitioned into more leadership roles, sales and leadership roles, I think that was so beneficial to me, still is to this day, of actually having that hands-on experience and understanding how hard that job is, right? Because if you go from being a technician into being an advisor, I think the where at times the really good technicians struggle is that they'll get into that seat, say as an advisor, and they assume a customer knows everything that they do, or they are, I always talk about that from a service manager perspective, and we call it the Michael Jordan effect or the Wayne Gretzky effect of like they were so good at their job that they can't understand why nobody else is good at their job. And so it's that really hard thing to overcome. And it's hard because they were so talented in a shop that it's hard for them to understand why others can't be. And I think it really drives their patience level down. And even with customers, right? I've seen that happen with customer interactions where maybe that good technician that walked into that role gets frustrated with the customer because they're not understanding, you know, like a voltage drop test or something. They're not going to
Yep.
understand any of that stuff. You have to be able to communicate and break it down to them, which takes a different skill set than being an excellent technician.
100%. Absolutely. And no, you're totally right. And it's okay if you're not, you don't have to be the expert at everything. You don't even have to necessarily be good at everything. One thing I learned really fast in dealerships and in service is a lot of your technicians, if you come to a technician, if I'm a service advisor, and I did this a lot because my running quote is, you don't want me working on your car. Like, I can do a few things, but I'm not the guy that you're calling to ask to fix something or diagnose something. I know how to read codes, and I'm just enough to be dangerous, but I'm not. And I think that that gives me a unique perspective because I had to walk in with hat in hand and say, hey man, I don't understand this. I need you to tell me, like, give it to me from the beginning. Like, what is a like what do you mean it needs a tie rod? Why do I need a tie rod? And most of the technicians, with some, there's always going to be those one or two that are a little cranky in the shop, and that's okay.
For sure.
But with rare exception, most of the techs are more than happy to sit there if you're willing to listen to them. They're happy to sit there and explain how it works to you and explain why it needs what it needs. Um, and I don't, as an advisor doesn't need to know how the metal is cast and all of the engineering specifications. That's not important. The advisor needs to know, why is this important to fix? How is it going to benefit the customer? And, the basics. What's it going to cost? How quick is it going to get done? And, the options from there. They don't need to know, every now and then you'll get an engineer or something like that that wants to know all the specs and all the details, and that's fine. But
Those ones drove me
generally,
crazy.
if you're talking, oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. What was always really funny was doctors, because doctors are so intelligent and so well versed in their world that going into a world where they're not as well versed is not so easy to do. Going back to your point of, how is it that other people don't understand this? It's so easy type of thing. Um, but yeah, I mean, in general, technicians are happy to share that information, but on the same token, they're happy to share that information to someone who's going to listen to them and also somebody who's going to act with that info. If they can take an extra 30 seconds and get 3 hours of work sold, then it's worth it.
Yeah.
But if they feel like they're wasting their time, they're not going to be happy about it.
That reciprocal relationship that you were talking about, when it works well in a shop, is such a beautiful thing to see, right? Where the advisor feels comfortable asking the technician a question, and the technician then maybe starts to build trust with that service advisor, that they're acting in their best interest as a technician. And I think it's a very fine line there, though, because it can go from a good relationship to one job kind of scrapping everything, right? And I think those that on both ends of that relationship, when you can truly act as like professionals, but also have kind of the camaraderie to give each other a hard time, or like just, I don't know. It's one of those that I think you can kind of define it, but then there's also some intangible things that make that relationship work really, really well. And when it works really well, it's beautiful. When it works really poorly, it's terrible.
Yes, and it's obvious either way.
Yes.
And I believe that I believe leadership has a large piece to do with that. And the reason I say that is, I mean, I was a service advisor for a long time. I had the metrics I needed to hit to get the best bonus I could. So I made sure I hit those metrics. And the technicians have the same thing. If they're on a flat rate scale, or if they're on a premium pay scale, I always did, a lot of my techs, I always did premium pay, where if they got to 45 hours, they'd get an extra dollar an hour. They'd get to 50 hours, an extra $2, whatever. Something to give them the benefit of, knocking it out of the park. And my guys that knocked it out of the park loved it. But as, by nature, we're all going to do what gets us paid the best, what fulfills us the best. And if your goals aren't aligned, and this is on leadership to do, if I'm a service manager and I'm judged on this, and this, then I need to work the pay plan for my advisors to support the things that make me more money. Because if I make more money, then the owner makes more money. So we want everybody stepping in the same direction. And a lot of times you get advisors that are paid off of, one of them that honestly kind of drives me nuts is effective labor rate. Because effective labor rate is easily cheated by cheating the technician out of time.
Yeah.
And that's not fair. When I was an advisor, I made a mistake one time. I sold on a 370Z, I sold a timing cover gasket. There's two of them. I sold the front one. It's an 8-hour job. The rear one was the one that was leaking, and it's an 18-hour job.
Ooh.
Now, the problem is, by the time we figured this out, we're already over halfway through the job. I can't sit there and be like, hey, guess what? Mr. Customer, yeah, remember how I told you it was going to be $1,500? It's actually going to be $3,500. That's not going to work. I can finagle some things, maybe get a little extra money, but coming back at 2.5 times the quote is probably not going to work. But the good thing is the way that my pay plan worked, and I talked to the manager and we worked through it, because I made the mistake. So guess whose fault that isn't? It's not the tech's fault. The tech told me it needed a rear timing cover. I quoted a front. That's my mistake. So I owned it. The tech still got his full time for the job that he was expected to do, which was the rear timing cover. A lot of advisors will look at that and be like, well, I can only pay you 9 hours. I know it pays 19, but I'm only going to give you 9. And that's not fair.
No.
That's not the right thing. And that's the kind of stuff when you talk about the results in the voice of the technician, and you talk about retention and things like that, technicians far and wide will talk about how they're cheated on their times. And you know what? They're right a lot of times. And it's unfortunate. But the advisor's also looking at it from a perspective of, well, I've got to feed my family this month. So it's a matter of finding a way to make sure that everybody's still getting their piece of the pie. And I know, there are folks listening to this right now sitting here like, why are you talking about when you made a mistake? But
I
those
think that's the
mistakes
best time to
happen every
learn.
day.
It does, and that's how we
Yeah,
learn, right? Like I think acting like none of us have made mistakes before is such a mistake in itself, right? Why not get these out in the
right.
open and talk about them? And in this scenario, I am interested from your experience, how does that work like in terms of allocation of hours? So in that example, it sounded like the advisor had quite a bit of control over the time that the technician was getting. How did that work
hmm
in kind of your operation in terms of like how you allocated hours or the power that you had as an advisor to allocate hours?
So when a lot of the shops that I worked at when I was an advisor, I had control over the hours that I billed to the customer and also the hours that I allocated to the ticket. Um, back in the old days, the techs would use little stickers and flag their time on the back, but then I could always scratch that off and change it or whatever. I'll be honest, I almost never did.
Right.
Um, and the reason is, like, I don't know how to do their job, so I'm not going to tell them what they deserve to get paid for the job. If the book says 10 hours, the book says 10 hours. If it took them 4 and it says 10, they get 10. That's the way it works. There's plenty of times where it's going to be the other way, but I've always been of the opinion that it's not fair to cheat the person doing the work. At the end of the day, the advisor's job is to sell the work, and sometimes it's not going to work out perfectly. But going back to the people aspect, if the advisor and the manager and the technician, if we have the relationship and we have that openness and communication, and we can say, hey, on this job, I got a bit of an issue. I need to figure out a way to make this work. Um, there's always a solution. As a manager, you can get creative with things. Sometimes it's, the gross per RO on that ticket's not going to be great. Sometimes you can, peel time off of that, but put it on something else and make it work. There's things that you can do, and there's ways, but leadership and everybody involved has to be receptive to the idea of solving the problem and not just being angry that it didn't work perfectly. Not
Hmm.
everything works perfectly. It'd be great if it did, but let's face it, this is the real world.
I
We've got to think a little bit about how does this affect the people involved, and how can we come with an amenable solution.
What you just said there is really important, right? In that not everything's going to go well, especially in our world, right? There are so many different intangibles, there's so many different things that could go wrong, and we do our best to make sure that they don't go wrong, but mistakes happen. There's a human element to everything that we're doing. And I think the best leaders have the ability to kind of view it from that standpoint of like, okay, this happened. Let's figure out how to make the best of this and make sure it doesn't happen again. Or how do we make sure that we fix something in the system? Whereas I think maybe more of the old school train of thought is to just get really, really pissed off and start screaming at everybody. And, I think that, especially as it relates to an advisor, and I point back to a conversation that we had with our good friend Chris Craig, who does a phenomenal job on a lot of content surrounding advisors because he was an advisor at one point. And, he had talked through the importance of an advisor. And we've had several conversations throughout the history of the podcast of talking just through that, of the importance that that role has in any shop, right? And not just a dealership, any shop. And yet how little attention that gets from leadership at times, and the attrition rate of advisors is through the roof. And it's no wonder why. It's because if something doesn't go right in one of those areas, if a technician feels wronged, if the owner feels wronged, if the GM feels wronged, if the service manager feels wronged, if the customer feels wronged, if one of those people in any scenario is upset, a lot of times it's the advisor that's taking the heat for it. And it's unfair in a lot of ways for that person. And yes, do they get compensated well? I think in a lot of cases they do, especially if they're good. But I've seen good advisors, when they end their day, just be so mentally worn out that they kind of check out. And if it's just a constant, it's a constant, like, I'm trying to make everybody happy and I can never make everybody happy, and this is just frustrating, it can be really, really easy just to be like, this isn't worth it anymore. I'm out.
100%. And a lot of times when we're talking about service advisors, so comparing this a little bit to technicians, so I put something, on LinkedIn maybe a month ago, just put a poll up. I'm not, I've got a few followers, whatever, on LinkedIn. I'm not like huge.
Go
I'm
follow him if
definitely
you
not
don't.
you.
Yeah.
Right. Uh, but I put a poll up just saying, what do people believe the hardest job in the dealership is? And it was definitely a heated race between technician and service advisor. And I would agree with that. The technicians, we've talked ad nauseum about the challenges the techs have, the constantly evolving technology, dealing with whatever comes in, the warranty labor times, et cetera, et cetera. But advisor is another one that, um, it's definitely one of the hardest roles that's filled in the dealership. And the big difference between being a tech and being an advisor is technicians get months of training a lot of times, or they go to tech school and they get 2-year program or whatever. uh, when I transitioned to being a service advisor, I had never worked in a dealership. I had sold chemicals to dealerships, and I knew the layout. I knew how to get where I needed to go, but I had never written service. I'd never used Reynolds and Reynolds or CDK or any of those. I got a day and a half of training before I was writing my own tickets.
Oof.
And there are so many advisors out there that are not getting the amount of training that they need and the amount of training that they deserve. And I'm not going to sit here and blame any one person or anything. I think it's a systemic challenge. The advisors that I see that are just blowing it away, that are making 150, $200,000 a year and whatever, those are folks that have been at the same dealer for a long time. They built their clientele. They got some training. They've spent some time learning and things like that. But they've also been around for a long time. And these days the churn and burn rate is so volatile. And you've got advisors that, technicians don't like working Saturdays, and I don't blame them. I don't like working
Me
Saturdays.
neither.
Advisors are in the same boat, and they're being worked 6 days a week. There's not a great deal of training. Yeah, you've got the manufacturer's modules or whatever. Okay, you can learn some from an LMS, but what I would love to see for that particular role is, and honestly, it's something I've been kind of working on the side, but I'm nowhere near to a point of being able to execute. Um, I think that advisors in general would benefit from a bit of a boot camp where they can learn some of these things. Um, you're never, when I used to train service writers and things like that, I would tell them, like, I could sit here next to you all day, every day for 5 years and still not figure out every single thing that's going to happen to you. Um, that's just part of life. But if you can at least, some of these advisors, they're not prepared for any time something gets weird. And it's sometimes it's just the little things and that industry knowledge. And we, as leaders in the space, as managers at dealerships, or us, or folks at the corporate level, we owe it to the people coming in, just like the seasoned technicians. We hope and expect the seasoned technicians to share their knowledge with the new folks that are coming in. We owe it to the new advisors to give them that same grace. And help them kind of understand some of the, let's call it tricks of the trade. One of the biggest ones that I've always said is, let's face it, most service advisors these days are paid on some kind of commission structure. But the most important thing that I firmly believe this, and there are going to be some people that choke on their tea when I say this, and it's okay. Um, the big difference between car salesmen and service advisors is, they're both paid on commission, but service advisors should not act like they're paid on commission. They should act like they're advising. Um, because when you get a bunch of service advisors that act like they're doing it to get paid, then the
Absolutely.
customer starts asking the question, is this really to my benefit or is it to their benefit? And I learned that when talking about fluid maintenance, because there's obviously the flush stigma and everything like that. Um, Fluids wear out, fluids need to be changed. That's a fact of life, as far as that goes. But the stigma says that, oh, well, they're just trying to flush your wallet. And anything that our industry can do to combat the idea that we're just out to take people's money, we need to be doing it, and we need to be doing it fast, because the court of public opinion gets stronger every day.
Mm.
And that's one thing I've always told advisors is like, yeah, you get paid on commission, but the minute you start acting like you get paid on commission, you're going to make less money.
I think that actually
Come at it from a
applies.
perspective of transparency.
I actually think it applies to car salesmen as well, right? Like, I think the ones that are, I personally hate car shopping and I love cars. And
Oh yeah.
when I was 16, 17, 18 years old, I loved driving through car lots. And then at some point, you just get tired of, you drive through some of the car lots and just get absolutely attacked by salespeople when you walk in, and you're like, this is not a pleasant experience. This is over the top, and it's not. In a lot of ways, it doesn't feel like you don't get the sense that they're there to help you, right? That you get the sense that they're there to make money. And granted, everybody goes to work to make money, so I don't think that's a secret to anything. But have some level of just like relationship building. And even for that salesperson that's out there of any type, if you're building a relationship, it's far more likely you're going to sell a second and a third car and a fourth car to them than if you're just getting that quick check. And it's the same for advisors, right? Like, if that's just evident that you are trying to do a wallet flush, like, that's not right. And if you are following factory recommendations, you are doing the right things and educating the customers in a way that they can trust you, you're building relationships for the future to where they are going to trust you. And if they get the sense that you're trying to screw them over, the chances that they're even going to come back to your shop again after that are little to none, right? Like, you need to act in a
Yep.
trustworthy way. And just for our world as a whole, the automotive world, speak to you diesel folks as well, collision folks, like, the more you act in a way that garners respect, the more we're going to get everything that we want as an industry. It just takes like some level of decency and not just constantly hunting for that low hanging fruit. Like, work on building some relationships, do some things. And relationship building isn't just external. If you're that service advisor, better darn well have a good relationship with your team that's doing the actual work in the shop, right? Like, you better have a good relationship with your service manager. You better have a good relationship with the GM, the owner. The list goes on and on and on. But if it's all transactional, you're going to have a tough time.
It's the people business.
Going back
It's
to what
the
you said
people
before.
business. I mean, yeah, it's your customers are people. As an advisor, as a service advisor, your technicians are as much your customer as your customers are. You've got to take care of them too. As a manager, your advisors and your techs are your customers just as much as your customers are. And you've got to take care of them, because if you don't, there is someone out there that's going to. And, you know, we've spent a lot of time, over the past several years, WrenchWay's been integral in this, of working to build technician pipelines and bring new blood into the industry and working to retain that blood and working to keep, honestly, to try to prevent dealers from just poaching somebody with an extra dollar an hour down the street. Because you're only as good as that extra dollar is, you're only as good as where you are on that level. Because if somebody's going to leave for an extra buck, they can always go back.
Hmm.
And that was an experience I ran into. I went from one dealer to another, and it was a different environment. I went from a small family-owned, operation to a larger corporate structured thing and everything. Had more money, I could pay people more, things like that. And I did to bring a few people over. But then when the environment went south, those people that left for a couple extra bucks went right back to where they were before because they realized that money doesn't always make the grass greener.
Hmm.
And there's environment challenges and things like that, and there's also the matter of people are going to remember how they're treated, and people are also going to talk about how they're treated. And if you get the reputation of being the dealer in town that is, we're where the mercenaries go, that's not what you want,
Word travels
because
fast.
there's not going to be any consistency. Exactly. And even if you try to change those stigmas, those do not change overnight. It takes time.
Oh,
And, that's something you got to remember.
I think there's so much value in what you just said there, because it is so true in that your reputation, it does not take long as a shop for word to start to spread that, and it is kind of funny to me, kind of being on the outside looking in terms of like daily shop operation now. But there's so many leadership folks in our world that they talk publicly about how much their team means to them and everything like that, yet they don't know, going back to one of your earlier points, they don't know anything about the people in their shop, yet they're out talking about how much they do for them. And so it's one of those things where the actions speak louder than words internally. And I'm interested to hear if you maybe have a similar experience, but I think it has to go beyond words, right? It can't just be you saying how valuable the people are, which is great. Like, it's good to give your people recognition. But if the internal perception is you've got the technicians all sitting around and saying like, "Oh yeah, look what they said there in that publication or whatever," but in reality, this isn't that way at all inside these doors. And I think I've seen that more than once.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's, it's one thing to, it's one thing to, I guess, talk the talk, and there's another way to walk the walk as far as that goes. And I've noticed it before. I've been in meetings with, with higher ups and things like that, where they'll be talking to somebody and say, "Oh, well, yeah, you want to be a service manager someday, don't you?" And the person that they're talking to will be like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, okay." And I'll sit there and know for a fact, like, this dude doesn't want to be a manager. He's already told me he doesn't want to go on that path. And it's it's understandable that in business leadership, you obviously want the business to go a certain way. You want to be successful, and you have a vision for how that success looks. Um, but you got to understand that sometimes that vision isn't always perfect, and you have to be able to be a little agile and be able to adjust to it. And also, understand who you have in those seats and who you have in those positions, and whether or not they're the right person. Let's call it what it is. That doesn't mean that they're bad or good or either one. It just means, pay attention to who you've got and what you've got. And really, a lot of the challenges and things like that can be answered just by listening when people tell you what they want, people tell you what their interest is. You know, one of the things that, always sticks out to me on the voice of the technician is it's almost 90% want a well-documented career path. That's not hard to do, but it starts out by their leaders sitting down and saying, okay, Jay, so we've got you here. This is where you're at right now. Where do you want to be? What do you want to do? Some technicians want to be a used car tech. And I get it, because they don't have to get in real deep in anything and they can make a ton of money. I totally respect it. That's cool. Some people like to use their brain. They want to do nothing but diag. Great. I've got a bar of gold waiting for you, because you're one in a million. But until you know, you're just guessing. And guessing only gets you so far. I had a technician back in, I'm going to say 2009, 2010. I was at a GMC dealer, and the Acadias and the Buick Enclaves had an AC evaporator problem where they'd start leaking. And, warranty time for it was like 6.8 hours, which was insane because you had to take the entire interior out of this car. It was wild. The first one I saw, I almost had a stroke. So we had one guy in the shop that, he said, like, it's not that dirty to do, so I don't have to get real dirty. So why don't you just give all of them to me? We're like, okay. And his philosophy on it was, if I do one or two and I lose time on it, that's fine, but I'll get better.
Mm-hmm.
And before you knew it, I mean, this guy, brilliant tech. He could have done the heavy line stuff. He was a guy who could do a differential and engine, transmission, whatever, but we had him doing AC evaporators, and we had a bunch of them. And we just gave them all to him because he asked for it. But by the time they started coming out of manufacturer's warranty, where they were paying 6.8 hours, and then they go to extended warranties where a good advisor could get 15 hours out of one from an extended warranty. All of a sudden, he went from barely hitting 40 hours a week to hitting 75 hours a week and not changing anything about what he did. He just got really good at a repair that nobody else in the shop wanted to do.
Right there, though,
and he made
right?
a ton of money off of it.
But that's attitude right from the start. And for you technicians that are listening to this, how many technicians would have said, "Oh my gosh, I don't want to do that. That job sucks. I'm not going to do I don't want anything to do with it." And then you have a technician, I've seen this over and over again as well, where that technician that embraces it and says, hey, I'm going to get good at this. And really just out of repetition, you're going to naturally get good at this. Like just looking at it through a different lens and not being so negative and really, it's easy when you go sit in the break room and everybody's complaining, you hear that one tech that's complaining about, I don't want anything to do with that job. But if you have that tech that just says, I don't care what it is, give it to me, I'll get good at it, and ultimately they'll benefit off of it. Man, is that refreshing. It's nice to not have to fight somebody to do a job.
It is. It's refreshing. And, it goes to, technicians with the positive outlook, can definitely do that and be really successful. Advisors with that outlook can as well. We've got fleet management services out there. We've got extended warranties, fleets, government agencies, things like that. There's so many different pieces of this business that come in and need service. One thing that I think is really driving the technician shortage is, we have a shortage, but we also have such a drastic increase in demand that we've got to get to levels that we've never been to, because, our patience isn't what it used to be. Right now, like if I want chicken wings, I can order them on my phone while I'm talking to you and recording this podcast, and somebody will drop them off at my doorstep in 25 minutes.
Actually sounds great now, by the way, even though it's only the morning right now. Like I could use some chicken wings. That's a good suggestion.
Oh, anytime. They should be their own food group. It's wonderful. But, with the demands being higher in so many different aspects, a lot of advisors will shy away from fleets because you have to do extra work to get approvals. Don't do that. Because if you become their guy, then you're going to make it back in spades. And, the money's there, and you don't have to fleece anyone to get it. You just
consistent work that's coming in the door.
The recommendations that make sense. Build that relationship, and I used to love landscaping companies because, when I was at that GMC store, I cut my teeth on those guys because fleets look at things different. A landscaping company looks at how much money they lose for every hour their truck's in the shop, but they beat their trucks like they owe them money. So
I sure
they
do.
need to have the work done and they need it done quick. So you focus on how to help their needs. And then if you can prove that you can do it and you can follow through, they'll follow you to the ends of the earth for it. And for service managers and for general managers and ownership, it's the same with your people. If you pay attention to their needs and you execute and you help them make their situation better, because that's the reason that all of us work, right? Like, we work to better ourselves and make a better life for our families and things like that. So as a leader, if we can focus on helping our people better themselves, those people will do anything we ask them to at any time. And then all of a sudden, if you've got a short of tech 5 hours, but you tell them, hey, I promise I will get you back, they'll believe you and they'll trust you.
Mm.
And that trust is everything.
So much of what we've talked about today is around trust, around communication, around respect. Some things that I think they don't cost money. It just takes being a good leader. And if you're a technician, giving those things back to your leadership, that will pay off for you if you really take that seriously. All really good stuff. Now, we do have to end similar to what we normally do, which is with some hard hitting questions, some really hard hitting questions for you. First one,
Okay.
what was your first car?
It was a 1991 Dodge Daytona IROC.
Nice.
Yep.
I love
Yep.
that.
It was so I actually it's funny because when I tell this story people are like you're a brat, dude, but I got that car for my 15th birthday.
Wow.
Um I got it because there was a combination of reasons. Number one, my dad always wanted one and he had never got one for himself. And so the opportunity arose. But the other was it was a stick shift. And my dad wanted to make sure I had plenty of time to learn how to drive a stick before I took my driver's test in a stick shift car. So that was the first car, and I liked it a lot. It didn't last long, but that's okay. You never know what you're going to get with an older used car, but it was fun while I had it.
That is so cool. And credit to your dad, because I think my dad, my first vehicle was also a manual, and there was not really a whole lot of a training period. It was go out and figure this thing out. And I think I burnt the clutch out within like the first 2 weeks and then had to replace that. So very funny. That's great. Second question, what is your favorite type of music?
Oh, my favorite type of music. So, if you looked at my Spotify Wrapped, you'd laugh because it goes all over the place. I will say it depends on my mood. Now, the what never fails for me is the 90s grunge era.
Oh,
I can
great
listen to
stuff.
grunge music all day long. Now, if I'm in the gym and if I'm trying to lift heavy weights and things like that, then it's gangster rap by
Oh,
all
all
means.
right.
But most of the time, if I'm hanging out, it's going to be the grunge music, the 90s rock music. There's nothing like it.
I think the Spotify Wrapped can tell you so much about yourself. I love getting that at the end of the year. I just got mine as we record this, and it is funny. I am all over the board. Like it makes no sense. Like I know when I'm on an airplane, I like kind of more. Like I'll listen to classical music. I'll listen to like Mumford and
Mhm.
Sons or something like that, and then I'll listen to hard rock. I'll listen to rap. I'll listen to country. I listen to everything, and it just depends on my mood.
Yep. Yep.
That's
Me too.
funny.
I'm the same way.
Last question out of these hard hitting questions is what was your first job?
Ah, this is a good one too. So, um, my first job when I turned 16, I went that first summer. I went and worked at Toys R Us, and I stayed there all the way through high school and into college. and I loved it there. It was awesome.
Really?
For a teenager, it was awesome because it it wasn't all goofing off, but it was a lot of goofing off. And it's funny because when I look back at it, one of the reasons I stayed there as long as I did, and one of the reasons I liked it, because I was in high school. A bunch of my friends, like, in the first year they were working, they got fired from 4 jobs. Like, oh yeah, I worked at Burger King for 3 weeks. I got fired because I stuck my hand in the deep fryer or something. That's a joke, but um,
My brother
I
was that way at
liked what I
Culver's.
did, and I stayed there. Yeah, yeah. And one of the big reasons that I liked what I did, and I think this kind of sticks out with me, is like we, as a lot of our long-standing folks, we would hang out, and like if we had a good closing crew, we would stay in the store. We closed at 9:30 back then, but once we got all the customers out, we'd stick around, we'd clear out some aisles and play basketball, or
Oh, awesome.
we'd play video games in electronics, or stuff like that. And then so we had that camaraderie and that friendship and everything. And let's face it, it was born from, we were all younger and goofing off and having fun at our job. But it was it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. We probably weren't as productive as we could have been, but we we did what we needed to do, and we had a good time with it. So
There's elements that I feel like we could take out of that and put in our professional day-to-day lives that would make it more fun. And we talk about the retention side. I don't think having fun is the
yep.
worst thing in the world at times, right? Obviously, you need to be productive and you have all the goals and everything else that we need to meet. But there's also time for that, just having fun with the people that you're with most of every day, right? Like it's really, really important.
Yeah, and you learn something from every job you have, and from all the people that you interact with and things like that. You're going to learn things, and they're going to stick with you for a lot longer than you think. Because I mean, I started at Toys R Us in like 1999. So, I mean, that was, ancient history at this point. And but I still remember being there. I still remember what it was like being there. And that just goes, I know I'm not alone in that. That kind of stuff
Oh,
sticks with people,
it
and
does.
that's what makes us who we are at this point.
I don't know if you're an office watcher, but they Andy Bernard at one point said, I wish we knew it was the good old days when we were in the good old days or something." And like that
Oh
totally
yeah.
kind of, I'm botching that quote, but it is one of those things where you look back over your different jobs and your different over the course of your professional career, and maybe some of the things like in the moment you focus on the negative, and then over the years you kind of look back and kind of really look at how much fun you had and the relationships that you made, and going back to, it's about people. Like so much of it is about the people, and when you think back about those memories, that's a lot of the good.
I keep telling my wife that before I retire, maybe after I retire, I'm going to write a book about, and it's going to be a book of short stories about random experiences in the car industry.
Yeah,
Um,
a lot of them.
Probably won't be able to be put on shelves because some of them probably won't be as appropriate as they need to be, but like, and you get with other car industry professionals, and I know that you've experienced this, and in my last role, I traveled a lot and worked with a lot of field reps, and the ones that were car industry veterans, we would just start trading stories, and
Oh,
you never realize how ridiculous the stories get. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, that did happen. Oh,
they, yeah, you get a couple cocktails rolling at a at like a company event or
yeah,
just a conference or something, and some of the war stories you hear from our industry are hilarious. Some really, really funny stuff. So yeah, there's so much good about this industry, so many good people like you in this industry, and I can't tell you
thank
how
you.
much I've
You too.
enjoyed this conversation, and how much fun we've had. Hope to have you back on sometime.
Likewise, thank you very much for having me again, Jay. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to the next time we get to chat.
You too, buddy.